In the spring of 1870, a 35-year-old samurai walked into the ruins of a bankrupt shipping company in Osaka with nothing but a government lease, 2 second-hand steamships, and a debt that would have crushed most men before they started. His name was Yataro Iwasaki, and within 15 years he would control the largest private fleet in Asia, build arsenals capable of arming entire navies, and lay the foundation for a corporation so vast that by the 20th century, it would produce nearly every weapon Japan needed to fight 2 world wars. The number of workers inside Mitsubishi's factories alone would reach 350,000 people at the company's wartime peak. The number of ships launched from their Nagasaki yards exceeded 600 vessels, and the aircraft they built, including one of the most feared fighter planes ever to take to the sky, would change aerial combat forever. But before all of that, there was just one man, 2 old steamships, and an idea so audacious that even the Japanese government wasn't sure it would work. If you've never heard the full story of how Mitsubishi went from a tiny coastal ferry operation to one of the greatest industrial empires in human history, stay until the end, because the story gets darker, stranger, and more impressive than anything you've probably imagined. Subscribe if you're new, and let's go back to the very beginning. Number 10. The man who started everything. Yataro Iwasaki's first gamble. Yataro Iwasaki was not born into wealth. He came from a lower samurai family in the Tosa domain, a region on the island of Shikoku that was known for producing tough, independent-minded men who didn't fit neatly into the social hierarchies of Edo-era Japan. He was arrested once as a young man for writing a disrespectful letter to a local official, which tells you something about his personality. By the time Japan's Meiji Restoration dismantled the old feudal order in 1868, Yataro had already spent years managing the Tosa domain's commercial operations in Osaka, learning trade, logistics, and the brutal mathematics of moving cargo across open water. When the domain's official trading company dissolved in the government reforms of 1870, Yataro didn't wait for a new employer. He took the company's remaining assets, 2 steamships called the Yoyu Maru and the Huan Maru, and relaunched them under a new name, Tsukumo Shokai. He changed that name again in 1873, this time to Mitsubishi Shokai, from the Japanese words for 3 diamonds, which became the company's iconic logo. His first business was brutally simple: move cargo and passengers between Japanese ports faster and cheaper than anyone else. That part he was very good at. Number 9. The shipping wars that built a fleet. The 1870s were a dangerous time to be in the Japanese shipping business, and Yataro Iwasaki knew it. 2 foreign companies, the American Pacific Mail Steamship Company and Britain's Peninsular and Oriental Steam Navigation Company, dominated Japan's coastal routes and charged whatever prices they wanted, because no Japanese company had the ships or capital to stop them. The Meiji government, desperate to build a modern national economy, handed Yataro a lifeline: government subsidies, mail contracts, and the use of additional ships in exchange for serving strategic routes. Yataro took the subsidies, bought more ships, slashed his prices below what the foreign companies could survive, and launched an all-out price war. The American and British companies fought back hard. There was a period in 1875 when passenger fares between Yokohama and Shanghai dropped so low that companies were essentially paying customers to ride their ships. But Yataro had the government behind him, and the foreign companies did not. By 1876, the Pacific Mail Steamship Company had pulled out of Japanese routes entirely. By 1880, Mitsubishi controlled 73% of all Japanese coastal shipping. The foreign competition had been broken, and Yataro had learned something important. The company that controls the logistics controls everything else. Number 8. The Nagasaki Shipyard and the birth of heavy industry. In 1884, the Japanese government made a decision that would change industrial history. It handed Yataro Iwasaki the lease on a failing government shipyard in Nagasaki for the remarkable sum of 1 yen per year, with the understanding that Mitsubishi would invest in modernizing it and keep it running. The Nagasaki shipyard was already one of Japan's most important industrial sites. It had a dry dock capable of handling large vessels and a workforce with years of experience in ship construction. But under government management, it had hemorrhaged money, and the Meiji bureaucrats wanted it in private hands that might actually make it productive. Yataro accepted the terms, poured investment into the yard, brought in foreign engineers from Britain and France to transfer technical knowledge, and within a decade had transformed Nagasaki into one of the most capable shipbuilding facilities in Asia. It was here that Mitsubishi stopped being a shipping company and became something far more dangerous, a manufacturer. Once you can build ships, the logic of industrial expansion pulls you toward everything ships need: steel, engines, boilers, instruments, weapons. The Nagasaki yard became the seed from which Mitsubishi's entire industrial empire would eventually grow. Number 7. Steel, coal, and the anatomy of a zaibatsu. Most Western readers know the word conglomerate, a company that operates across many different industries. Japan in the Meiji era developed something more extreme and more integrated: the zaibatsu, a family-controlled industrial group in which a single holding company owned controlling stakes in dozens of businesses spanning banking, mining, manufacturing, shipping, and trade. Mitsubishi became one of the 4 great zaibatsu alongside Mitsui, Sumitomo, and Yasuda, and its structure was perhaps the most deliberately engineered of all of them. After Yataro's death in 1885, his brother Yanosuke and later his sons Hisaya and Koyata expanded the company systematically. They bought coal mines in Kyushu to fuel their shipyards. They established a bank to finance their expansion without depending on outside capital. They built trading companies to sell their products internationally. They acquired land in central Tokyo, the Marunouchi district, which they literally transformed from a muddy field into one of the most valuable business districts in Asia, and used the rental income to fund further industrial ventures. Each new business fed the others. Coal fed steel, steel fed ships, ships earned revenue that funded banks, banks financed more mines. By the early 20th century, Mitsubishi was not just a company. It was a self-contained industrial ecosystem, and virtually no outside competitor could break into any part of it. Number 6. The aircraft division that changed aerial warfare. In 1920, Mitsubishi established its internal combustion engine manufacturing department, which would later become the Mitsubishi Aircraft Company. The timing was deliberate. Japan had watched the First World War transform aircraft from experimental curiosities into decisive military weapons, and the Imperial Japanese Navy had concluded that air power would determine the next great conflict in the Pacific. Mitsubishi got the contracts. Working initially with British engineer Herbert Smith, formerly of the Sopwith Aviation Company, the British firm that had built some of the best Allied aircraft of the First World War. Mitsubishi's engineers learned fast. Within a few years, they were designing aircraft independently, and in 1937 they introduced the aircraft that would make Mitsubishi internationally infamous in the worst possible way. The Mitsubishi A6M, universally known as the Zero, was a carrier-based fighter aircraft with a range and maneuverability that no Allied aircraft could match in the early stages of the Pacific War. At the time it entered service, it could outfly virtually anything the United States or Britain had deployed in Asia. Jiro Horikoshi, the engineer who led the Zero's design team, had achieved something genuinely remarkable, and had done it under crushing pressure from the Navy, which wanted a plane that no country's technology of the era should have been able to build. Number 5. The Zero Fighter, engineering marvel and symbol of an era. The technical specifications the Imperial Japanese Navy handed to Mitsubishi in 1937 were, by the standards of the time, nearly impossible. They wanted a carrier-based fighter that could reach a top speed of over 500 kilometers per hour, had a range exceeding 3,000 kilometers with a drop tank, could climb to altitude faster than existing fighters, and was still light and maneuverable enough to outdog a dedicated interceptor in close combat. Any one of those requirements alone would have been challenging. Together, they represented a design contradiction. Long range requires fuel. Fuel adds weight, and weight kills maneuverability. Horikoshi and his team resolved the contradiction by eliminating every gram of weight they could find. They used an experimental aluminum alloy called extra super duralumin, that was stronger and lighter than anything previously used in aircraft construction. They removed the self-sealing fuel tanks that protected pilots from fire in combat, accepting the risk of catastrophic fuel fires in exchange for reduced weight. They eliminated pilot armor plating. The result was an aircraft of extraordinary grace and lethality that was also, in certain conditions, a flying death trap for its pilot. When the Zero appeared over China in 1940, Allied pilots reported encountering a fighter that seemed to defy physics. It took nearly 2 years for American engineers to fully understand what they were dealing with, and even then, countering it required entirely new tactical approaches. If this is the first time you're hearing about Mitsubishi's role in the Second World War, leave a comment below. I want to know which part surprised you most. And if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe so you don't miss the next episode in this series on the great industrial empires of the 20th century. Number 4. Battleships and the limits of industrial power. While the Zero was Mitsubishi's most famous product, the company's Nagasaki shipyard produced something even more astonishing in the 1930s and early 1940s. Two of the largest battleships ever constructed, the Yamato and the Musashi, were the products of a Japanese naval doctrine that believed sheer size and firepower could offset American numerical superiority in any Pacific conflict. The Yamato, launched in 1941, displaced 72 Iwo tons fully loaded and carried 9 46-centimeter guns, the largest ever mounted on a warship, capable of firing shells weighing 5 tons a distance of 42 kilometers. Mitsubishi's Nagasaki yard built the Musashi, Yamato's sister ship, under extraordinary secrecy. Giant screens were erected around the entire yard so that foreign observers could not photograph or measure the vessel under construction. Workers were sworn to silence. The ships were genuinely engineering wonders. They were also catastrophically obsolete by the time they entered service, because the Pacific War would be decided by aircraft carriers and submarines, not by the gun duels between battleships that Japanese naval planners had envisioned. The Musashi was sunk by American aircraft in October 1944, hit by an estimated 19 torpedoes and 17 bombs. The Yamato followed in April 1945, sunk by American planes on a one-way mission with fuel only enough to reach Okinawa. The two greatest battleships ever built never fired their main guns in anger at an enemy surface vessel. Number 3. The end of the Zaibatsu and the birth of modern Mitsubishi. Japan's defeat in August 1945 brought American occupation authorities to Tokyo with a list of priorities, and near the top of that list was the dismantling of the Zaibatsu. American planners believed, with considerable justification, that the great family-controlled industrial conglomerates had been the economic engine of Japanese militarism, providing the ships, planes, weapons, and financing that had made Japan's aggressive expansion possible. General Douglas MacArthur's occupation government passed laws in 1946 and 1947, breaking up the Zaibatsu holding companies, forcing the sale of family-owned shares, and banning the use of Zaibatsu brand names. Mitsubishi was legally dissolved into more than 100 separate companies, none of which was supposed to cooperate with the others. The Iwasaki family lost control. The Mitsubishi name was prohibited. It looked in 1947 like the company that Yataro had built from 2 rusty steamships in 1870 was finished forever. It was not finished. The former Mitsubishi companies quietly continued doing business with each other, sharing personnel and customers and institutional knowledge. When the Korean War created massive demand for Japanese industrial production, and American occupation policy shifted toward rebuilding Japan as an anti-communist ally, rather than punishing it as a defeated enemy, the informal Mitsubishi network began reassembling. By the mid-1950s, the 3 diamonds were back. Number 2, the post-war rebirth and the car that conquered the world. When Mitsubishi Heavy Industries re-established itself in 1964 by merging 3 of its successor companies back together, it entered a Japan that was in the middle of the most spectacular economic growth in modern history. But the most consequential post-war Mitsubishi story wasn't about ships or planes. It was about cars. Mitsubishi Motors Corporation, spun off as an independent company in 1970, became the manufacturer of some of the most influential vehicles of the late 20th century. The Mitsubishi Galant, Lancer, and Colt established the company in international markets through licensing deals with Chrysler, which sold Mitsubishi-designed cars under the Dodge and Plymouth brands in North America. But the vehicle that truly announced Mitsubishi as a global automotive force was the Mitsubishi Lancer Evolution, the Evo, a turbocharged all-wheel drive sedan that dominated World Rally Championship competition in the 1990s and became one of the most worshipped performance cars in automotive history. For a generation of enthusiasts who grew up with the Evo posters on their bedroom walls, Mitsubishi meant one thing: the most sophisticated chassis dynamics money could buy at a price a normal person could afford. It was a machine built with the same obsessive engineering precision that Jiro Horikoshi had applied to the Zero, just pointed in a direction that didn't end in war. Number 1. The three diamonds today, and what Yataro actually built. This is the part of the Mitsubishi story that most people never hear, because by the time we've talked about the Zero and the Yamato and the post-war recovery, it's easy to think we understand what the company is. But the full scope of what Mitsubishi became, and what it represents as an industrial phenomenon, requires stepping back and looking at the whole picture at once. Mitsubishi today is not a single company. It is a keiretsu, a network of legally independent companies that share the three-diamond logo, cross-hold each other's shares, and coordinate through a monthly gathering of their presidents called the Kinyokai, or Friday Club. The member companies include Mitsubishi Corporation, one of the largest trading companies in the world; Mitsubishi UFJ Financial Group, which is the largest bank in Japan and one of the largest in the world, managing assets exceeding $3.5 trillion. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, which builds submarines, satellites, spacecraft launch vehicles, power generation turbines, and commercial aircraft components. Mitsubishi Electric, which makes everything from elevators to radar systems to the variable speed compressors inside hundreds of millions of air conditioners worldwide. Mitsubishi Motors, Mitsubishi Chemical, Mitsubishi Materials, Mitsubishi Estate, which owns and manages enormous portions of central Tokyo's most valuable real estate. The combined revenues of the major Mitsubishi Group companies have at times exceeded $400 billion annually, a figure larger than the GDP of most countries. But the number that matters most is not the revenue. It's the trajectory. Yataro Iwasaki started with 2 aging steamships and a government lease in 1870. He started in a country that had been deliberately isolated from the rest of the world for over 2 centuries and was scrambling to build every modern institution, banks, armies, factories, universities, essentially simultaneously. He competed against Western companies that had decades of industrial head start, vast capital reserves, and the commercial infrastructure of established empires behind them. He won anyway, not through luck, not through a single brilliant invention, but through a systematic, generational commitment to building vertically integrated industrial capability, owning the whole chain from raw material to finished product, from mine to ship to customer. That logic, executed over 150 years by 4 generations of the Iwasaki family, and then by the professional managers who inherited their system, produced something that Yataro himself could not have imagined in 1870. A network of companies so deeply embedded in the infrastructure of modern life that you almost certainly interact with something Mitsubishi made every single day without knowing it. The building HVAC system that keeps you comfortable, the ship that brought the container with your consumer electronics, the satellite that relays your phone signal, the turbine that generated part of your electricity, the bank that financed the company that employs you. What Yataro actually built was not a company. It was a system for turning disciplined human organization into lasting industrial power. And in 150 years of success, failure, war, dissolution, and rebirth, that system has never fully stopped running. The 3 diamonds are still on everything. So here is the question I want you to answer in the comments. If you could go back and stop Mitsubishi at any single moment in its history, before it built the Zero, before it built the Yamato, before it helped fuel Japan's expansion into China and the Pacific, would you? Or does the industrial infrastructure it created, which now powers peacetime economies and lifts living standards across Asia and beyond, make the accounting more complicated than that? There is no clean answer. That's what makes this story worth having. Comment your answer below, and subscribe if you want more episodes on the industrial empires that quietly built the modern world.